has the pandemic actually done to us as human beings and to the businesses that we have created? So first and foremost, let's understand that the pandemic has enabled us as humanity to realize that even a tiny invisible pathogen, which we cannot see, but which we are told has certain characteristics and is a very virulent kind of a pathogen, that has brought our lives to a grinding halt. And not only that, it also has driven home this idea that our lives on planet Earth are limited. We live lives for 90, 95, 100 years at best. But that's a very, very tiny, minuscule fraction.
Okay, so we are live on Facebook. We're all set. So, shall we begin?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So, hello and welcome to yet another episode of Humans of Mitti Ke Rang podcast series. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Bharat Wakhlu. So, sir, let me just give a brief introduction about you. Sir is the founder and president of the Wakhlu Advisory, a transformational thought leader, futurist, innovative and ethical value creator, leadership coach, felicitator of beneficial change, international keynote speaker, and author. He is a committed, result-oriented business leader and cross-functional team manager with demonstrated records of success spanning a career over 3.5 decades. He also invests in and advises startups with innovative and sustainability-oriented value propositions. Prior to his advisory, mentoring, speaking, and consulting role, he spent more than 30 years working as an entrepreneur and a business leader within the Tata ecosystem. He held a senior operating and board level positions within Tata Steel and Tata Sons in India and was the president of Tata Inc., the North American holding company of Tata based out of New York. Till October 2016, he served with the US helicopter company Sikorsky Aircraft, which is now a Lockheed Martin company, in Stratford, Connecticut, as the managing director for India, a fellow of American Society for Quality and of the All India Management Association. He served till recently as the chairman of the board of ASQ South Asia and a board member of AFS India. He is the co-founder with his brother of the Foundation for Peace and Compassionate Leadership, a not-for-profit company aimed at cultivating the values and leadership initiatives that yield lasting peace and prosperity for all. He is also the founding director of the Resilient Leadership and Changemaker Limited Liability Partnership. So welcome, sir, and thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you're doing well.
Thank you, Manjari. I am delighted to be with you all. And thank you for the introduction. Yes, I am very happy to be here because the theme, sustainability, is very, very close to my heart. And I think as humanity, if there is anything that we need to focus on collectively, it is the idea of sustainable development and improving the human development indices across the globe.
Okay, so let's begin with the interview.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so sir, my first question that I want to ask you is how the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to change the business practices.
Okay, to answer this question, Manjari, we first need to understand what has the pandemic actually done to us as human beings and to the businesses that we have created. So first and foremost, let's understand that the pandemic has enabled us as humanity to realize that even a tiny invisible pathogen, which we cannot see but which we are told has certain characteristics and is a very virulent kind of a pathogen, that has brought our lives to a grinding halt. And not only that, it also has driven home this idea that our lives on planet Earth are limited. We live lives for 90, 95, 100 years at best. But that's a very, very tiny, minuscule fraction of the fact that planet Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. So that's another very, very significant realization. The third realization has been that even something invisible can actually bring our lives to a halt. A lot of the mortality, is something that we are all feeling very, very badly about because it's happening across the globe. But more importantly, it also shows that our businesses are extremely vulnerable to these shocks. Now,
Okay.
this is a biological shock. And for years now, for decades, scientists have been saying that climate change and climate emergency is going to give us even bigger shocks. So I think this realization that a biological shock has brought us to our knees, literally. Businesses have shut down. Many businesses have lost their customers because the demand has fallen. Many businesses have got their supply chains completely disrupted. Finances are in short supply. So everything is in turmoil. This disruption by virtue of this tiny invisible pathogen has been so significant in terms of giving us a learning that a shock like this is not going to be something that we can take, we can bear if we are not prepared for it. So this is one of the greatest learnings that I think the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated. So what does this mean for businesses? So before I get to that, I think we also need to understand that businesses were for the past many, many decades, definitely since the 1950s after the end of World War II, and for much of the past 70 years, businesses were literally on adrenaline, more, consume more, use more resources, you know money is not the problem, just expand, become bigger, cut down forests, pollute the rivers, it doesn't matter as long as we make our profits. That was the relentless drive, Manjri, that we saw for definitely for 70 years, but I would think even for the past 150 years to some extent on a smaller scale before that, because the number of industries and industrialists were not so many. But after the 50s or so, the numbers grew up and the adrenaline, profit driven focus of enterprises, that became the norm. And that is one of the reasons why everything else was put on the back burner. Things like sustainability, things like the data from researchers about global warming, about climate change, all that was put on the back burner because people say it doesn't matter as long as I'm making profits. So the pandemic has changed this paradigm. People now understand that we will be in dire straits, not only in terms of our businesses, but even as humanity, we will be in dire straits if we do not figure out a way to change the trajectory of business. Now, why does business have such an important role in all this? For one thing, I don't want you to start thinking that businesses are bad. No, businesses have really contributed substantially to improving the quality of life of all of humanity. Things that we take for granted. The fact that food comes to our table, or it's available in a supermarket and you pick it up from there and it's available to you. This is a big thing. Or medicines. In the olden days, and not so long back really, medical crises meant the impoverishment and the death of thousands of people. The Black Death of the medieval times, the plague, it decimated huge swaths of humanity, not just in Europe, but even in adjacent countries. So medical science has improved, the quality of life has improved, our transportation has become more convenient, our standards of living have improved, and these are thanks to the innovations in technology, in science, and the ability of businesses to get these innovations to us at an affordable price. Don't forget that affordability is one of the important factors to make these benefits available widely to everybody across the globe. But at the same time, the skewed development of businesses where they have been trying to churn out goods and services for the benefit of people, but without consideration for all these stakeholders, has been a problem. Now, what do I mean by stakeholders? Planet Earth, for instance, is a
Yeah.
stakeholder. Now, planet Earth, like all of us, doesn't have a voice, but planet Earth gives us indications. For instance, it is very well known that over the past 750,000 years, there have been 6 or 7 glacial cycles where glaciers grew and contracted. And there was a fluctuation in the atmospheric carbon dioxide. So it would go up, then come down, depending on the cyclicality of the glacial age or whatever. But these were long cycles, and never in the history of planet Earth did the carbon's percentage in the atmosphere ever cross 300 parts per million. Okay, it never crossed that. And the average over these 1 million years was 200, maximum 200 parts a million over these million years. But after 1950, Manjari, the carbon levels in the atmosphere have been going up at an alarming rate, and they've crossed 300 in 1960, and today we are at 410 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, of carbon in the atmosphere. Now the point is, what does this do? This actually means that the the atmosphere is getting warmer. Almost 1 degree Celsius increase has happened over the past 100 years. This means that the polar ice caps in the Greenland region and the Antarctica, those are shrinking. Himalayan glaciers on which we all depend for water, Ganga, Jamuna, Jhelum, Indus, Chenab, all these rivers depend on these glaciers. Those glaciers are melting. In Japan, Mount Kilimanjaro's that white little crown at the top of that sacred mountain is shrinking. So all this is happening because of anthropomorphic influence. And what amongst of people is actually responsible? The use of energy and the use and the unbridled consumption by humanity of natural resources and goods is causing this to become literally a runaway process. So these realizations are dawning us upon humanity in a big way thanks to this biological shock. Now, you also asked, how will it change businesses?
Yeah.
You have to appreciate, Manjari, that businesses change when their leaders change, when their investors change. And I think, and I'm speaking from evidence that I've gathered in my conversations with CEOs and others around India, I am noticing that there is a desire to change the way business has been done so far. People are saying that we want to now make businesses that are designed differently, that take care of planet Earth, take care of all these concerns that have been articulated for such a long time, but which were not acted upon by people and businesses because the focus was always on profits. And people are saying, conscious leaders are saying to me that we want to change the way we have been doing business so far. And we want to redesign our companies to serve not just our customers, but our stakeholders, of which planet Earth is a very important element. We want to take care of the water bodies, we want to take care of the rivers, we want to take care of the forests, the flora and fauna. And at the same time, we must also make sure that our businesses become more humane, more committed to the well-being of people. Because what happened in India in the pandemic was we saw thousands upon thousands of workmen with their families into walking over great distances to get back to their homes, because either they were out of work or were unsure about their future. Now, that was a humanitarian crisis of a kind which also points to the fact that businesses have not been developed in a way that is wholesome. And so I think businesses will definitely change, but as I said, it starts off by basically having leaders change, and they in turn have to determine that they would like to design their companies afresh. But when I talk about leaders, I must also clarify that, even the leaders of the past were of a certain kind. They were driven. They were like, Cecil Rhodes. I'm sure you heard the name. Cecil Rhodes was a South African imperialist businessman, and he became prime minister as well. Driven, exploitative, really, really not concerned about the well-being of people or the planet or anything, just about making profits. He started the De Beers Diamond Company, and he was a ruthless practitioner of this idea. In fact, Rhodesia was named after him. Today, Rhodesia is called Zimbabwe and Zambia. So, the point I'm trying to
Okay.
make is his influence was enormous, but very, very negative and inappropriate. So, those kinds of leaders were preferred. In India also, many of us, especially your generation, might not remember, but you definitely would have read that India was under the British yoke thanks to a company. The East India Company was
Yeah.
a business. And it was so exploitative, Manjari, so driven by the need to give its directors grand and handsome dividends in London, that they took this nation for a royal ride. Now, can you imagine that? That is the extreme, the opposite of what we want today. Today, we want businesses that are humane, socially just, non-exploitative. Don't forget, even slavery in North America started from an economic perspective. A profit motive was at the heart of it. So we want businesses that are really focusing on non-exploitative development and improving the quality of life of people in a way that is good for planet Earth, good for people, good for everybody. Now, that is the kind of leadership we want, which I like to call compassionate leadership. So, a leadership that's committed to social justice, and which requires, Manjari, a very different kind of leader. A leader who understands the interconnectedness of all of us in the web of life, for one. Somebody who's caring, compassionate, who listens, who believes in gender equality, gender diversity, someone who really, really is committed to happiness for all. That is what is required in the leaders of today and of the future. So if these things are to happen, I think we can certainly say that if they're already happening, as I said, they are in small groups around the world, it's thank you to C-19 and the pandemic. Because this realization, Manjri, would not have happened otherwise. We've been literally given a whack, a firm whack by Mother Nature to say, hey guys, you've been doing what you thought was a great deal, a good deal so far, but you're completely out of sync with what's best for me and all of life. So I think that's how I think coronavirus will change business.
Okay. So, how can the COVID-19 reset, help the firm build a sustainable future?
Okay, so building up on what I just told you right now, so good leaders who wish to change how they are running their enterprises, who are keen to change the way they've been doing business, and who want to, like you said, build firms that will be able to run in a sustainable fashion. First and foremost, such leaders will have to see this biological disruption as an opportunity for themselves, planet Earth, and for their businesses. So that's the first step. They have to see this as an opportunity, and they have to understand that, look, if we have to serve our customers, what is the best way in which we can serve our chosen customers so that even as we serve them, even as we improve the quality of their lives, we do not adversely impact the well-being of communities elsewhere in on planet Earth. We mustn't forget the interconnectedness. So a lot of people say, oh my God, I'm throwing my effluents outside of the factory gates. Hello, there is no such thing as outside off. We're all on planet Earth, and therefore anything that you throw away is still there. It's still impacting somebody, some part of our ecosystem, some part of the ecology. And you can't shut your eyes to that anymore. So that is the other important realization. I will serve my customers, but I will do so without adversely affecting planet Earth. Now, this calls for innovation. You can't do this if you keep on doing things the same way, spewing effluents into the air or into the rivers or into the oceans and saying, oh, I'm keeping my factory space clean. Sorry, that kind of housekeeping is no longer acceptable. We want you to run your businesses in such a way that even as you're improving the quality of life of your customers, you are not afflicting other communities or planet Earth in an adverse or negative fashion. So that's the other realization. Now, I do believe that the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations are a wonderful template for business leaders to start saying, okay, if we can't do all the 17 things that have to be done, and people who know that these SDGs, they're all interrelated. So even if you pick up a few, you really would be wholesomely impacting all the others as well. So that's a wonderful starting point. And I think people and leaders who really, really wish to make a difference can serve their customers and be committed to planet Earth if they start looking at the SDGs, which is here, and start using these 17 as a starting point for doing things a little differently. And they have to also understand that their own employees have to be treated not as a dispensable resource, but as a capital, a part of the assets, a part of the capital of the organization. What we saw in India, where these workmen, both the permanent and the largely the contract workers, they were literally, thrown onto the streets. I think that kind of
Yeah,
approach is not acceptable anymore.
not at
And
all.
that humaneness has to be brought in. The compassionate part of leadership has to be in evidence in every business, because I do believe that that is the fundamental. And of course, then things like food security, happiness, and large scale farming of animals, and the use of excessive energy in supply chains. Those are all the smaller aspects, but they're all interlinked. So I think it calls for compassionate leadership, a very, very deep understanding of the fact that profits are of no use. Even surpluses are of no use if you cannot live a wholesome life. And for that, as human beings, Manjri, I'm sure you'd appreciate,
Yeah.
we want joy, we want peace of mind, we want happiness, we want the love of people. We want to be loved, we want to love others, we want, you know, our 70, 80, 90 years must be lived joyfully. Now, if you are relentlessly pursuing a goal that takes you away from all this, it's worth stepping back and saying, hey, what am I actually doing? So that is how this pandemic will help us to reset. It really means rethinking, redesigning, reimagining how we will run our businesses.
Okay. So, sir, basically, United Nations came up with the SDGs with a target 2030 in mind. Like, not all, but at least most of the SDGs should be achieved till 2030. But given the current crisis situation, the pandemic, the poverty in the world overall has actually gone up instead of going down. So, do you think businesses will be able to, address this kind of situation, or maybe help with the take help with the non-profits and come up with an idea, or maybe a method to try to achieve these SDGs by 2030?
Okay, that's a very, very intelligent and a good question, Manjri. So thank you for asking it. Let's understand the SDGs a bit better. They're all interconnected.
Yeah.
And the only way in which we as humanity can achieve those 17 goals is by working collaboratively, not just businesses with other businesses, but businesses with governments, communities, civil society, not for profit organizations, NGOs. In India, Section 8 companies, and the whole plethora of public sector, private sector, government, community, civil service organizations, NGOs, you know, community organizers, every one of us has to work together. Now, that's what I meant by re-engineering or reimagining how we do business. For too long, businesses have been run, with a lack of transparency, a lack of openness. They would not listen to what others had to say. They would shut themselves out from the concerns of communities, their stakeholders. Stakeholder engagement was an unknown idea. So I think the very idea behind re-engineering or reimagining how we do business is about working resiliently and collaboratively with every single agency that might have a role to play in the achievement of the SDGs. Because without that, there is no way on earth that we can achieve the 17 SDGs by 2030. Now, take, for instance, no poverty. Poverty is not something that's localized in some place, it's
Yeah.
spread around the globe. And the reasons for poverty are also very well known. It's not only exploitation, it's also being in certain parts of the world, resources, the skills, the availability of energy. I mean, I'm not a development specialist, but I know that the factors are huge. So if you have so many factors, you're no longer dealing with what human beings are most comfortable with, which is direct causation.
Okay.
That means I push a door and it opens. That's direct causation. I push it and it opens. Systemic causation, we don't understand as humans. It's beyond our cognitive abilities to understand systemic causation. Now, what does systemic causation do? Systemic causation means there are multiple factors. Like, for instance, if the carbon dioxide or carbon percentage in the atmosphere increases, it creates global warming. Global warming also means the oceans become warmer. When the oceans become warmer, it changes their levels rise because the ice caps melt. Now, these are all interrelated factors. And human beings don't have the ability to understand systemic causation. So how do we tide over that? We tide over it by working across the board with one and all who can make a difference to solving a problem. Making sure that any aspect that can have a bearing, any variable that can have a bearing, has to be understood completely, has to be mitigated, has to be affected, has to be influenced, and only then can we work. So this is going to be at the heart of reimagining business: collaboration, cooperation, listening, documenting, and using all the tools of data analytics to support our theses is critical for us to be able to achieve these SDGs as we know them, because otherwise there is no way on earth we can get even close to them. If it's like, I have to work with you, well, we have to start talking to each other. But if I hold on to myself like this, no, no, I'm fine the way I am, then there's never going to be any collaboration between us. So that's what I really meant by saying a redesign, re-engineering, reimagining businesses, including their processes. I didn't go into such detail, but that also is part of the whole thing. You cannot possibly bring about these significant changes unless the processes at the operating level also change and are aligned with the SDGs. That's why I think the SDGs are a very good starting point, in fact.
Okay, so which sectors do you think have the most potential, to practice sustainability in the immediate future?
That's a question that is put to me a number of times, and my answer may not be liked by too many people because I say every single sector has to respond to these challenges and the crises together. You can't single out any single sector. Yes, certain sectors might be more amenable to rapid change. Now, take for instance, in this pandemic, healthcare companies, pharmaceutical companies, medical equipment companies have not lost as much money as many of the others, like airlines, hotels, or travel related businesses, restaurants. So I would say that if we have to start these companies that have made a slightly better return because of the pandemic, they should set the tone, they should lead the way. But ultimately, nobody can say, no, no, I can't do it right now because I don't have the resources. I'm sorry. Part of the creativity and reimagining and redesign requires us as business leaders to understand what can I do if this is the problem. You really have to see this as a problem that you will not rest until you solve it. And every industry, every sector, without exception, has to be a part of this. Yes, I do understand that smaller industries, SMEs, the micro industries, and so on, their contribution may not be as big as, say, a large refinery or a large steel company or a large gas cracking unit or whatever. But the fact is, every single company, every single sector has got to do this. And I think a fundamental thing about the whole thing is that, at the heart of it all, Manjari, is this fact that we are all living on planet Earth. Supposing we were to say that, oh, I will do my bit and I don't care what the others do, or I can't do mine, let the others do what they have to do. We are living in an interconnected world where life itself is a web of life and it's all interconnected. And however much, we may say that what we do doesn't have an effect, the fact is the oceans are all connected, the air is all connected. So pollutants created in Brazil by the burning of the Amazon forest has a bearing on people in India. Even though Maldives is a tiny country, the acidification and the warming of the ocean is going to sink Maldives for no fault of theirs. So you have to understand that that is the kind of humaneness and compassion and the understanding the leaders have to show if they have to make a difference. And that is why I do believe that they have to redesign their businesses in a way that they start using fewer resources, less resources. They reduce their consumption of resources. They reuse whatever they can. They recycle it. They rejuvenate, their companies and the planet in the process. So the 4 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, rejuvenate planet Earth. So everyone can do that. And that is why I would say that every single organization and sector has to function on this. And really, it's about leadership. You know, uh, just about 150 years ago, people would say, oh, you can't do it without horse-drawn carriages. Then you had another development. Then you said, oh, we can't do without fuel, fossil fuel run cars. Mr. Elon Musk has shown that it's possible. So every single crisis has the potential to be seen as an opportunity, and great leaders, compassionate leaders, creative leaders, those who really are committed to the well-being of all of humanity, will put their thinking caps on and reimagine how to do what has to be done.
Okay, so how will it develop a trust-based culture for the years to come?
So let's understand why we are even talking about trust. There is this, I think, an annual survey done by the Edelman Group, and they talk about how trustworthy organizations are viewed as, or which are the organizations that are most trustworthy. They do a survey. And the tragedy has been that for the past many years, businesses have been functioning at a very, very low level.
Okay.
Businesses are even less trustworthy than police forces. Can you imagine? In many, many
Okay.
parts of the world. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The Edelman survey a couple of years ago showed that even the police force, with all the negative flack that the police has been getting, are still more trusted than businesses. Now, this does not speak very highly about organizations that have really contributed, as I said in the very beginning, to the well being of humanity. So many of the wonderful things that we take for granted are because of corporations, because of businesses. The very fact that you and I can talk, being so many hundred miles away or in different parts of the world, is because of technology brought and made affordable by businesses. So businesses are well suited to taking up challenges of any kind. On that, I'm very, very clear. Having worked in the corporate sector for over 3.5 decades, I know their capacity. Innovative, they can get the right talent, they can really put the heads of people together, brilliant minds together. They can get the resources in one place, they get the capital, they can get investors, and therefore it is not beyond them to be able to make a difference to the well-being of humanity as a whole and to planet earth, and to take up even the sustainable development goals. But for that to happen, Manjari, they have to communicate this concern. And that, in my view, is the starting point for building trust. Today, what's happening is companies are seen to be so self centered that people don't trust them one bit. They know that, oh, this company will even give me food that's adulterated just to make profits, even if I, God forbid, lose my life in the process. Now, that kind of an exploitative approach of companies in the past is still carrying forth. People still view companies in that way. Now, I want to give an example from the group that I worked for, the Tata Group. Whenever people would want to join a company, they say, I want to join the Tatas. And when I was working for the Tatas, I would ask them, why do you want to join the Tatas? They'd say, because, oh, the Tatas, they really, they're a caring company. And I would say, whom do they care for? Oh, they care for their customers, they care for their employees, they care for the community. So that communication, as a result of both Jamshedji Nasrwanji Tata's vision in in the 1850s and 1860s, when he started to set up his own manufacturing companies, all the way to his successors like Dorabji Tata, then J.R.D. Tata, and then Mr. Ratan Tata and others. All these people communicated and stood for this value. Now, businesses have to really, really start communicating this. And communication, Manjri, doesn't mean just talking and using PR to, make a point. No, go out and talk to the people you serve. Go to the communities, listen to them, engage with them, demonstrate your commitment to their well-being, meet your customers, talk to them. Of course, customers people talk to all the time because products won't sell otherwise. But communities, other stakeholders, go to those people who are downstream of where your factories are and find out, are they affected in some way by what you're doing? Listen to them, care for them, solve their problems. Let there be truthfulness, let there be compassion demonstrated, and let uh, you know let this be the essence of how they function. Then building trust is going to be easy. And the other thing is, of course, don't play politics, because politics is about dividing, whereas I'm talking about integrating. integrating businesses with communities, integrating businesses with people, with the lives of people, so that we all live harmoniously and benefit from this beautiful synthesis of stakeholders, businesses, but working together for the overall well-being of humanity.
Well, actually, I want to work for Tata too.
You want to work for Tata too, so I'm not
Yes, I
surprised.
I have been a huge fan of Tata CSR. Being a CSR professional, I definitely want to go there. So,
Good,
okay,
very good. Happy to hear that. And God willing, if somebody from the Tata Group is listening to your interview with me, maybe they'll send you a letter.
hoping for the best.
Okay,
Okay,
go ahead. Yes.
moving on. How can the rebuild after COVID-19 be approached in a way that, alleviates or eliminates the challenges that are faced in India, economic, environmental, and social? Because quite honestly, in India, not many companies, focus on environmental CSR. They prefer social CSR right now.
Yeah. Are you aware of the national guidelines for the environmental, social, and economic responsibilities of business? Have you heard of that document?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, good. So that document has 10 principles, or sorry, 9 principles, which cover all these aspects. And the good news is that the Securities and Exchange Board of India has made it mandatory for the 500
Yeah.
top listed companies to give disclosures on what they're doing against these 9 principles. Now, I'm happy about this because apart from the fact that I was the chairman of the committee which drafted these guidelines, I'm also very, very happy that it was very, very well received and very appropriately received by all those stakeholders who understood what we are talking about. And in my view, companies today might be focusing on social issues and all that, but I do believe that there is an equal number of agencies that are working on the environment as well. So I
Okay.
think we have to understand that you can't dissociate these. It's not as you can take environment separately and social responsibility separately and economic responsibility separately. It is all interwoven. As I've been mentioning to you, this is a system. Our planet is a system, and systemic causation is responsible for many of the crises and concerns that we are addressing right now. And therefore, you cannot pick and choose. You got to work on all three. And that is why I personally feel that working on sustainable development is the way forward. And just a word here, since you're a CSR professional, I am vehemently against CSR.
Okay.
Do you know why? And I've always been, and people who know me know that this has been my consistent stand all through.
Okay.
Supposing I were to tell you that in the wrong hands or in the wrong fashion, CSR is like giving blood money in some cultures. You murder somebody, and then the judge or the qazi will say, okay, now you pay so many 100,000 dirhams to this person's family, and you are now free. Does that man come alive again, the dead man? No. In the same way, if companies do not pay attention to reimagining how they run their businesses and make them fundamentally sustainable and having a lesser impact on environment, even if they do years and years of CSR, it will not bring back a forest that is denuded in the process of their business, or an aquifer which is made impure because of business, or a river that is into which you dump effluents because of the business. I think it's important, therefore, that CSR, if it is an add on to sustainable business, it is very, very welcome. But if CSR is done like you pay blood money for the murder of somebody, I'm sorry, I'm completely against that. I'm saying this with all the authority at my command, that that kind of CSR is so damaging, because you are simply putting you're fooling yourself, and you're fooling everybody else, maybe not other people as much as yourself. Because if I'm pouring in money into something after, let's say I've denuded a whole Himalayan forest which took 800,000 years to create. I've cut it down to make flats or apartments or something, or a factory, and then I give some CSR money to the villagers who is to derive their livelihood from this forest. Do you really think it's an equitable transaction?
Not at
It's
all.
not.
No.
Not at all. And that's why the company has to think 1,000 times before even touching a pristine forest, or even polluting a river or a water body or a ocean or anything. So that is the thing, Manjri, that we have to focus on. CSR, in my opinion, if not done the right way, is extremely damaging. And I want your and our audience today to listen to this, because this is it is so misleading. I have denuded a forest. I have ravaged the fertility of the land, and now I'm giving a tiny token to somebody just to eke out a living. What kind of a transaction is this? This is utterly despicable. It's not okay. So that is why you, as a CSR professional, and all CSR professionals who may be listening to this, need to know that even as you speak about CSR, see CSR as an add-on to sustainable development,
Absolutely.
not as a thing to be taken out as a on a limb on its own. Then it's completely unacceptable.
Okay. So I'm coming over to my next question.
Yes.
What is the duty of foundations, in their partnerships with the NGOs in these times?
The duties of foundations, in the sense that these are foundations which have deep pockets and have finances at their command. Is that what you mean by a foundation?
Yeah, foundations and CSR committees of the CSR unit of a company, like that.
Okay, so in my view, first and foremost, the CSR committees of companies should be led by the highest ranking executive of the company. And I know there might be some people listening to this right now on your show, and they'll say, oh, no, but we have a general manager, or we have an executive who is fairly senior. Sorry. The CSR committee has to be headed by none other than the CEO slash MD.
Okay.
And the importance is to be further reinforced by the board of this company reviewing the sustainable development slash CSR activities of this company. And please remember, when I talk about sustainable development orientation of the company, I mean that everything that the company does contributes towards sustainable development. And the CSR is only a minuscule add on to their efforts. But fundamentally, the business is not adversely affecting people or planet Earth, or overexploiting the resources of planet Earth, and so on. So that is what I would like boards to review. And if boards are not reviewing this, they are not doing their job. We need boards to understand that the longevity of their businesses will be in jeopardy if their businesses do not become aligned to what is good for planet Earth, what's good for people, and what's good for shareholders and the customers and employees together. You cannot single out and you cannot pull out any specific stakeholder and say, oh no, this is the most important. Sorry, that era is dead and gone. We are no longer living in an era where we can say that, oh, this group of stakeholders is the most important. If you still want to say that, let there be a clear understanding of the rules of how you will break a tie if there are two stakeholders who have conflicting or and essential demands. So that's the other important thing. The third thing I would like to say is that If you are fundamentally a business driven by sustainability development principles, by the national guidelines that we spoke about, and are truly transparent and open and committed, you will find innovative ways of making surpluses even as you do what you do. So, in my view, then, that the CSR emphasis will decline.
Okay.
And even though the Section 135 of the Companies Act of India specifies that 2% must be kept aside, if your whole business is designed around sustainable development, you may actually spend a lot more in that process. You can all offset that against the 2%. So your, the foundation and CSR as being a separate part of the business, all that will eventually get amalgamated together into the running of the enterprise. So that is, in my view, the departure that has to be made. And I think people like you, Manjri, and people who are trained in CSR need to understand this fundamental reality that you cannot be treating CSR like blood money. That would be a tragedy for humanity and a tragedy for planet Earth.
Yeah. Okay. So how can the foundations or CSR enable the NGOs to adapt to the organizational and programmatic strategies, to respond to the need of our.
For that, I will, like to specify two or three important aspects. Number one, I'm committed, as I said, to the idea of businesses changing how they function. And I said in the very beginning of this conversation that we've been having
Yeah.
that businesses need to be led by conscious, compassionate leaders. That's number one. So we need to start hiring more such leaders. And if NGOs and foundations and others can actually play a role in this, well, they have to come to the forefront. And in this respect, I'd like to mention that the foundation that I'm a co-founder of, it's called the Foundation for Peace and Compassionate Leadership. We are actually trying to create leaders who understand exactly what I've been telling you on this podcast, that to change your businesses, you got to change your frequency at which you think. And at what frequency does your mind resonate with life itself? So that's the emphasis we want to place on developing compassionate, conscious leaders. The second thing that has to be done is, and this is again where NGOs and CSR professionals and foundations can work together, is pick up projects over and above making your own business sustainably oriented or sustainability oriented. Over and above that, take up projects that are aligned with the SDGs. Take up some part of, let's say, zero waste, or alleviating poverty, or life on land, or life in the oceans, or any one of these things. Take it up and do something about it, but in a way that your solution should not aggravate some other problem somewhere else. Remembering that this is a system, a closed system, and systemic causation is a critical aspect of succeeding in this endeavor, or understanding systemic causation is a significant part of making a wholesome impact. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is keep on ensuring that people who don't have the livelihoods or the skills are given those skills, given the livelihoods, given the resources, the ability to improve their lives. Ultimately, we've got to create, we don't have to give jobs as much as to enable people to serve one another and create surpluses in the in that fashion. Because this job oriented thinking is really part of the problem. We cannot give jobs to everybody, but there is going to be work for everybody. If somebody is poor, those who are not have work until the people who are poor come out of poverty. So if somebody is sick, there'll be work if you have the right skills. If somebody is hungry, you'll have work. If you're a farmer, if you're a cook, if you're a restaurateur, if you're a supply chain expert. So we have to look at creating work opportunities for everybody, not jobs always. So this is what is part of the reimagining of business. This is a part of the process of thinking through and re-engineering, creatively redesigning the way we function as companies, as society, as humanity. Because I think that's where the NGOs and the foundations can play a key role.
Okay, so, sir, as it's stated in the Companies Act of 2013 that, companies should give at least 2% of their uh, overall profit to CSR.
Mm.
So, how can these foundations on CS or CSR extend the support beside money?
By volunteering, and I must share a story with you here. This is
Okay.
something which, in my view, is a very very powerful story. And this would have happened way before you were born, so
Okay.
you can listen to it carefully. This happened in the mid 1970s.
Okay.
As you know, the World Health Organization, which is again in the news right now, was very very keen to eradicate smallpox from the world.
Yeah.
And smallpox, by the way, for those of you who would never have known how terrible a disease that was, smallpox used to ravage communities and little children by the thousands every year, thousands. And God forbid, those who would come out of the illness would have their faces all pockmarked, and we don't get to see all that. But it was really, really horrific. And therefore, this initiative of vaccinating people around the globe and eliminating smallpox was welcomed by every single country around the world. However, by mid 1970s, after this whole project had been on for a few years, a few decades, it turned out that India was the only country where there was still a population that was not fully immune to smallpox. And where was this population? It was in the jungles of Chota Nagpur, in what used to be called
Okay.
undivided Bihar at that time. Now
Okay.
it's part of Jharkhand.
Okay.
So the World Health Organization people came from Delhi to Jamshedpur, where the Tata Steel Company used to, where it still is, and Jamshedpur, as you know, is one of India's first planned cities. So they came to Jamshedpur, saying, look, they met the managing director at that time, I think Mr. Rusi Modi or somebody. No, not Rusumodi, somebody before him. So, and they said, so we're throwing our hands up in despair. There's a small set of villages in the jungles of Ranchi and Chota Nagpur, where we have people. We know there are people, tribal people probably, who are still getting infected, and we want to eradicate smallpox completely. So we need your help. So Tata Steel said, okay, what do you guys want from us? They said, we want you to help us monitor. We want you to help us carry the vaccines, carry the syringes, give us nurses, doctors, and monitoring, sir, is important. And true to Tata Steel's approach to such matters and its very, very laudable community orientation, what they did was they formed a task force led by a wonderful executive called Mr. Bodhanwala. And Mr. Bodhanwala was along given a bunch of doctors from the Tata main hospital in Jamshedpur. They've got a few nurses from the other regions from Ranchi and elsewhere. And the task force was formed. And there were health workers, there were public, health, people who were trained in all those areas. And this task force went on systematically monitoring. And remember, this is not the age of analytics and data as we know it now. This was the daytime when we had to use pins to on the map to show where are the smallpox cases. But relentlessly, this task force went about this whole thing, and it went about spending its own money. By the way, Tata Steel spent money, and way more than 2% that the government is saying you should do now. It spent that money. It tracked this problem in villages. Ultimately, after 4 or 5 months of relentless work, there was one woman who was left, who still had not been vaccinated. They located her, gave her the vaccine, and since that day, India is completely smallpox free. Now, what an amazing story. And WHO celebrates 1975-76 as the year smallpox was completely eradicated in the world. But it required a humane, passionate, committed company like Tata Steel to give its resources freely. So when you talk about percent and all that, if the orientation is to serve the community and be, to care for humanity and life and planet Earth, you'll be amazed, Manjri. 2% will become 5%, and the company will not be any worse for it. The problem arises when I'm hoarding. I'm trying to hoard. Then 2% seems like a big deal. But if your company is working for global well-being, there is no problem. And I just told you this beautiful story. Imagine if Tata says, no, 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 our job is to make steel and do nothing else. The WHO would still, many years after that, have been trying to fight the problem. So, a global scourge was done away with. It was done away with in a highly structured management fashion. Resources were put to use, exactly the good things that companies can bring to the table. They used all that and made a success in a way that public health was improved globally. Now, take another example, for instance. We're talking about uh, polio eradication. That also requires the same kind of approach, but there are some communities who are resisting taking the polio vaccine, oral polio vaccine. Someone said, no, this is not good for you guys. This is where companies have to step up and say, hey guys, sorry, you're still thinking 17th century. Times have changed. If you don't give your kids this, the whole community is at risk. That is the kind of thinking, inclusive thinking, that is required of businesses and companies in the post pandemic era, the post C-19 pandemic era. That, in my view, Banjari, is the way forward. And then 2% is no big deal because you're going to be spending much more anyway on the whole thing.
So
Okay?
that actually really was an inspiring story. So I think makes me want to work for Tata even more.
I wish you well. You have my blessings, and I hope somebody
Thank you
from the
so
Tata group is
much.
listening to this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Okay?
Sir, one more question I have for you is that, there is a big garbage patch in Pacific right now,
Yes.
which is almost 3 times the size of France. So, do you think that maybe companies can, you know, come up with a way to get, I mean, like clean it, or maybe, um,
Actually, yeah, you're right. It should not be there in the first place.
yeah,
But if it has to be cleaned up, I think there can be a global coalition of
okay,
organizations which can be put together to do it. Who can put together the resources and get it done. But I think let me therefore wrap up our conversation with one idea. You know, we have so far been talking about our economy being in what is known as a linear fashion, moving ahead in a linear fashion. You extract resources from planet Earth, from the mines, you process them, you throw away the waste and give away the goods to the public. Of course, the public buys them, but and then when the public is done with those goods, they throw them away again. Please understand that when I talked about the 4 R's, I said we reduce consumption, we reuse what's with us, we recycle
recycle.
what we can, and we rejuvenate our planet in the process. Now, there's one economic model which achieves all this, and that is the circular, excuse me, the circular model of economy. The circular model of economy functions by reusing, recycling, and reducing consumption. So, for instance, in that model, of course, the concept of ownership goes away completely. So, if I want to have the service of transportation, a company gives me a car or some device or some gadget or some helicopter or quadcopter or something. I don't know what. It gives me some technologically sound solution for which they charge me a fee for using it. And when I'm done with using it and its life is over, I give it back to the company. They dismantle it, reuse parts, and create a new product, an innovative product, and give it back to people as a service. So products as services. And also remember the shared economy, which of course has also hit a bump in the pandemic, but Airbnb, Uber, a Lyft, and a lot of the sharing economy ideas, they caught on precisely because you're leveraging assets which otherwise were used only for a minuscule fraction of their availability. So we have to start thinking on these lines. And why just the garbage patch? I mean, all that garbage which has gone into the ocean would actually be recycled by the producers of those garbage and wouldn't exist. So we have to start understanding that it's one thing to deal with the symptoms of a problem, like clearing up the garbage if it collects. But I'm of the view that we have to go to the root causes, and that's why I keep on emphasizing that systemic causation has to be understood and dealt with. And only then can we make a success for all of humanity, all of humankind, and not just us, even generations that are yet unborn, they too will need to rely on planet Earth, and we need to therefore respect that and leave behind a planet that is healthy, worthy of the future generations, and not the kind that the future generations will start giving us curse words saying that you ruined a beautiful blue planet just because of your foolishness.
Okay, so that was my last question. So, anyways, thank you so much for joining us today. And I really wish, the foundation of peace and compassionate leadership would help generation like us, to come up with ways to make a sustainable future.
Wonderful. Manji, thank you so much for being a wonderful hostess and a great compare for this conversation. I wish you well. And yes, the Foundation for Peace and Compassionate Leadership is there to serve humanity and planet Earth. And with your good wishes, I'm sure we'll make good progress in that. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much for doing this podcast again. And to our viewers, stay home, stay safe. We'll be back with more such podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Yes,
Bye bye.
same to
Bye.
you.
Bye bye. Thanks.